Hello, this is Mocha Product Manager Martin Brennan, and I'm a tree! In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to track this lovely tree with PowerMesh when various foreground elements are in the way, and then animate a simple face rig to insert directly into the track. If you want to follow along, you can download the tree footage in the description, but we encourage you to record your own voice to play around with the animation yourself. So, I've set up a comp here and called it tree main with the source footage as the only layer. We're going to apply Mocha Pro to this layer from the effects list. When the time comes, we'll be using the insert render back in After Effects, bringing in our face via the insert layer option. So let's start by launching Mocha and get to work. We've got 138 frames to work with here, and we're going to start by tracking and masking any foreground elements that will get in the way of our main trunk track. So we've got this big out of focus leaf in the foreground here, and back at the start of the shot, we've got this big leaf. Let's start with this leaf. Now, because the trunk is the main object in focus, it has the most contrast and detail. This means we need to be careful when tracking the out of focus leaf. To do this, we're going to draw an X-spline inside the leaf boundaries. Normally, when doing Mocha planar tracking, we'd encourage you to draw on the outside of the leaf to get a better idea of planar motion, but in this case it would work against us, so we're going to keep it on the inside. I'll zoom in a little by holding down the Z key and dragging up, and then select the X-spline tool and draw around the inner edge. Ultimately, we'll end up drawing 3 masks for each leaf, and I'll explain why as we go. Once we have the shape drawn, we can right-click one of the handles and drag to smooth out the curves. We'll then set up the tracking. We'll set the minimum percentage of pixels to 90% since we don't have a lot of detail to work with, and we'll track in perspective because you can see, as we scrub through the shot, there's a fair bit of turn and wobble with the leaf in the wind. We'll also turn on the surface and grid just so we can see how the track is going. It won't matter too much if there's a little drift in the track, because we'll only be using the leaf tracks for masking and roto work. Now, we only really need to track the portion of the timeline where this leaf covers the tree trunk, so we're going to set a layer out point around frame 70 so we're not tracking too far. So let's start tracking forwards, and I'll speed up the recording until it's done. Now that the track is done, let's play it back. You can see a nice flutter in the track where the leaf is moving with all that wind. We'll rename our layer for good housekeeping and call it Leaf 1 Track. I'm going to turn off this layer for the time being so we can focus on tracking leaf number 2. We'll move to the end of the shot, and again, this one's quite tricky because it's very blurry, and we need to approach it in the same way, drawing a new layer spline on the inner part of the leaf so the tracking doesn't get distracted by the in-focus trunk in the background. We'll set the same parameters as before, 90% and tracking in perspective. We'll also set an in point for the layer, as we only really need to track back as far as about frame 97, and then we can come back to the end of the shot and track backwards. Once that's done, we can see we're getting that nice subtle movement of the leaf, so we won't have to roto all that by hand. We'll call this one Leaf 2 Track, and once again, we're going to turn off the processing and the visibility of the layer. So the next part we need to plan out is the actual trunk track, and we're going to be using the PowerMesh tracking to capture the non-planar rotation of the tree. We'll find a clean frame to start on where we can see the trunk in full, and draw a fairly large X-spline shape. We'll then turn on perspective tracking, as there'll still be a fair amount of perspective motion, and then turn on mesh. This will create an adaptive mesh which finds features in the footage to make vertex points, but instead I'm going to choose uniform mesh from the dropdown and adjust the mesh size to about 64 pixels. We can then generate the new uniform mesh. You'll see this overlaps the spline, but this is useful as it helps maintain a static mesh that follows the planar motion at the boundaries and keeps the mesh tracking neat. Before we start tracking, however, we want to make large garbage mats around our tracked leaves, as the PowerMesh tracking can be sensitive to subtle movement. So on our first leaf, we'll draw a new X-spline layer just outside the edge boundaries to make sure no leaf edges can interfere. We'll call this one Leaf 1 Track Matte, and then we'll link it to the original Leaf 1 track we did earlier via the dropdown called Link to Track. As we play this back, you can now see the Leaf 1 Track Matte is following the track. We'll need to make a couple of adjustments where the track warps the shape too far. We can turn off Colorize Mattes to see a cutout shape, and then we can go through and drag out the control points, creating new keyframes where the leaf is not entirely inside the visible area. We can then do the same thing for leaf number 2. We'll draw a new large shape, call it Leaf 2 Track Matte, and link it to Leaf 2 Track via the Link to Track dropdown. Then, check and adjust the edges so they're inside the matte. It's worthwhile setting the same in and out points on the Leaf 1 and 2 track mattes as you did with the original tracks, so the foreground mattes don't interfere any more than they need to. We'll call our trunk layer Trunk Track, and now it's ready to go. So let's review what we have so far. We have 2 leaf tracks, 2 large garbage mattes in the foreground that are linked to those tracks, and a large trunk layer under the garbage mattes ready to go. We'll set the minimum percentages of pixels up to 90 once again, and turn on auto smoothness so Mocha can figure out how rigid the mesh needs to be to distort with the bark. Since we've started at a midpoint, we'll track forwards first, and then review, and track backwards. Okay, so we've done this side, so we can go and scrub back and take a look. So that's looking good, the garbage matte is working well, and we're getting good rotation in the track. Now, we can track backwards. Now that side is done, we'll review this part. You'll notice a bit of crushing in the mesh on the right hand side, but that is expected and will work well for the insert that we do next. You'll also see a few of the bumps in the bark are also being tracked nicely. Where the Leaf 1 roto is covering the main rotation, you'll notice the mesh is a bit rigid, and that's by design. Mocha doesn't try to track the subplanar areas that are covered by occluding layers, and will just follow the planar motion. This won't be noticeable, as the final roto will cover the motion and look natural. Or at least as natural as a talking tree can be. The next phase is to make the face itself and insert it into this track. Back in After Effects, we want to make a fairly large face to match the resolution of our footage. You can do this any way you like, including grabbing mouth shapes from stock images or drawing elements within After Effects itself, but I've drawn the basic face shapes in Photoshop so I can get a rougher, more natural, cartoony vibe using a Wacom tablet. So over in Photoshop, I've got 2 files, a basic face PSD and a mouth phonemes PSD. The face is 2000 by 2000 pixels, so I get good clean lines when I insert it later. I've made a placeholder mouth to get the approximate placement, and we'll end up removing this when we insert our phonetic mouths later. I've also made a right eye and right pupil, and a left eye and a left pupil in separate layers. This will be useful for animating them separately with control nulls. The mouth phonemes PSD is where I have drawn some mouth shapes, and is about half the size of the face PSD at 2000 by 1000 pixels. These separate layers represent some of the mouth shapes humans make when saying words. The S, N and sh sound, the A, E and I sound, the O and R sound, the U sound, the F and V sound, the Ch sound, and the La sound. This is by no means all the mouth shapes, as we're keeping things simple for the style of animation we're going for. I'll be making a lot of creative liberties with the sound representations, but you can feel free to expand or shrink this list as much as you like. If you want to know more about the different mouth shapes, there are numerous reference guides out there by some great animators. Just search for mouth phonemes or mouth shapes to get yourself started. Now, we have our layers, so we can import the PSDs into After Effects as separate compositions. Importing the face as a composition converts the PSD layers to AE layers in the same order. We don't need the background or the mouth later, so we can delete those. For the mouth PSD, we'll import the same way, converting the layers to a comp, but for this file we'll need to do a bit of work to set it up for animation. We'll remove the background first, as we don't need it. The way we're going to animate with these mouth shapes is to call them as individual frames in a drop-down control and a simple 2-line expression. So first, we need to stagger the layers into their own separate single frames. To do this, we'll first select all our layers. Next, we'll make sure we're at the very first frame in the timeline, and press Alt or Option and the right square bracket to reduce every layer down to one frame. Then, we right-click the selected layers and choose Keyframe Assistant and Sequence Layers to cascade the layers across 8 consecutive frames. On the last frame, we'll press the N key to trim the workspace area. Then, in the Composition menu, we'll say Trim Comp to Work Area to just have the timeline trimmed to the current frames. So now, we have a single mouse shape on each frame. Now we can set up the face control. Go back over to the face composition and drag the mouth phone MPSD into the face comp layer list. We then position the mouth where we want it on the face. I recommend switching to one of the large mouth shapes so you can see the spacing better. Since we're only using 8 mouth frames in a 138 frame animation, we need to set a time remap on the mouth layer. We can then drag out the mouth layer in the timeline to match the same length as the rest of the comp. The next thing we need to do is set up a control to be able to keyframe the mouth shapes over time. With the mouth layer still selected, we'll go up to Effect, Expression Controls, and then select Drop-Down Menu Control. You could also do this with a slider control, but I prefer the drop-down because you can then choose the actual mouth shapes in the list. The drop-down appears in the effects list in the timeline, and as a full drop-down in the effect controls. Now we need to add items to the drop-down list. We click on Edit and rename the existing items in the same order as they appear in the mouth layers, starting with the La layer. Once we run out of layers to rename, we can add new layers with the plus symbol at the top. Once we've added all the layer names, we now have a drop-down with 8 options. Now we want to be able to tie the selection we make in the drop-down to the frame inside the mouth list. To do this, we'll make an expression on the time remap effect that we placed on the mouth layer. Alt or Option click the time remap stopwatch icon to reveal the expression scripting field in the timeline. We'll delete the existing text in the field and use the pick whip to drag to the menu parameter in the drop-down menu control we set up earlier. This will create a reference to that control in the field. Then, we want to assign this parameter to a value. We'll move to the start of the text and type selection equals to use the word selection to hold the value of the menu selection. We then need to add a semicolon to the end so After Effects knows this is the end of the first line, and press return to go to the next line. Next, we use a special global value to turn the selection into frames in time. We click the small arrow icon here and choose Global Frames to Time. This will add a lot of stuff we don't need, so we'll delete anything inside the brackets and put the first word selection that we set up before. What this is doing is saying find the number of the menu selection and then assign it to a point in time from the list of frames. To test this, we can click the outside of the field to set the expression and then choose one of our drop-down items. When we do this, you'll see that the selection is slightly out of sequence. This is because our menu selection starts at 1 and the frame offset in the mouth comp starts at 0. To fix this, we just need to add a -1 to the selection value inside the brackets so that when we choose our options, they now line up as expected. So now we're ready to set up the animation for our voice. We'll drag in the voice we want to use and play it back. Hello, this is Mocha Product Manager Martin Brennan and I'm a tree! In order to see the sound clearly, we can twirl down the audio section and then the waveform section to see the peaks and valleys of the sound. This will help guide where we want to place keyframes. For example here, where there's this starting large peak, is where I say hello, starting with a sharp h and flowing down to the ooh sound. We'll select the mouth layer again and position our playhead at the start of the h sound and click on the stopwatch in the drop-down menu control. It's useful to press U on your keyboard to see the keyframes for this layer, as we'll be doing a fair bit of adjustment. The first thing you'll notice is that the drop-down control has set a hold keyframe by default, which is really important as you don't want to tween between the selected mouth shapes, you want it to suddenly change. So on this keyframe, we're going to select a mouth shape that can represent h. I don't have a specifically labelled h sound, so we'll go for the best representation, which is the sound, where the mouth is wide open. We want to start the sequence with the mouth closed. So we'll move to the beginning of the timeline and choose the sound, which has the mouth in a straight line. Next is an l sound after the h sound, so we'll find the la mouth for that. Finally, we have the oo sound for this word, so we'll set up the o mouth shape after the oo. Now we can play it back to check how that looks. Hello, this is... All we need to do now is keep going back and forth through the audio and refining the mouth shapes as we see fit, generating keyframes along the way. The important part is to go for what looks right as opposed to being technically accurate. Words can run together or be overridden by louder phonetic sounds, so you want to try and hit the obvious beats in the syllables. I'll speed up the recording here so you can see the process, and then we'll look at the result at the end. Okay, so let's play that back and see what we've got. Hello, this is Mocha Product Manager Martin Brennan, and I'm a tree! Now, we could obviously tweak this further, but for the time being, it's looking good to try inside Mocha as an insert. We'll go back over to the main comp and drag the face comp in as a new layer. Then, we'll select the tree source layer and switch over to the effect controls so we can see the Mocha effect panel. From the insert layer dropdown, we'll choose the face layer from the list. This will now be available as a clip to choose inside Mocha. So back inside Mocha, we can select the trunk track layer and scrub back through to the keyframe we drew the layer on. We'll switch over to the insert module, which automatically hides the PowerMesh so we can see better. Under the insert clip, we're going to choose insert layer, which will show our happy face comp we assigned earlier. They're a little small at the moment, so under my source tab, we will click Fit Surface to ROI, which is a quick way to make sure the insert clip is set to its original ratio. We're then going to hold down the Shift key and drag one of the surface corners to uniformly scale up the face until it's the right size, and then use the middle surface point to position it correctly. Then we'll go back to the Comp tab in the Insert module and turn on PowerMesh Warp. This is going to make sure that the face warps around the turning tree. So let's scrub through and see what that looks like. You can see it's distorting nicely around the trunk, but at the moment it's not being hidden by the leaves. If we turn on Use All Layers in the Mask section of the Insert module, the large mats we created earlier will cover up the insert. Now, there are two approaches here to refine the roto for the leaf mats. One, we take the existing track mats we made here and refine them, or two, we create two new roto shapes from scratch and link to the tracking data. I'm going to take the second approach and create new roto shapes just in case we want to retrack this project and need the larger garbage mats again. So we'll come back to the beginning and turn off the existing shapes. We'll set the insert layer on the trunk to none for now so we can see what we're doing. We'll then take our trusty X-spline tool and start making a much more refined shape, keeping to the hard edge. We can right-click any of the handles to select all the control points, then drag to soften the curves. We'll then use edge width feathering to soften this out to the blurry part of the leaf. We'll call this one Leaf 1 Roto, and then use Link to Track to link it back to the original Leaf 1 track. Then we can scrub through to check for any drift, and keyframe the roto out to the leaf edges where needed. Just keep in mind you should only adjust what is needed. If the leaf isn't covering part of the insert, you're wasting your time keyframing a perfect edge for that part. We can check this by selecting the trunk track again and reapplying the insert layer clip, then scrubbing through to make sure it looks right. Now we do the same for the other leaf. I'll speed up this section as it's exactly the same process as before. So now we have the roto done, we'll just drag the track mats below the tree trunk layer to make sure they don't interfere with any foreground masking in the render. We can now close and save and see the final result for the roto. Back in After Effects, we'll select Insert Composite from the Module section under Module Renders. Then we can turn on Render to see the result in the comp. I'll cache a quick preview so you can see it in action. And here it is playing back. Hello, this is Mocha Product Manager Martin Brennan, and I'm a tree! Now we can add any embellishments we like here to the face comp and it'll be automatically updated into the warp track. Let's do this now by adding some final touches like moving eyes and some expressive eyebrows. First, I'm going to lock the main comp so I can see the tree at all times, then double click on the face comp in the layer stack to open a new viewer. We can then drag this new viewer to the side until we can see a snap point, and now we can see both views side by side. So now we can make the eyes follow us left to right. I'm going to drag my right pupil to the top so my left and right are together in the stack. Then I'll create a new null and call it pupil parent and drag it between the two eyes. I'll then select both pupils and pick whip them to the null to parent it to the layers. Then I'll lock both pupils so I don't accidentally select them. Now when I move the pupil parent, you'll see both pupils moving together. We'll repeat the same steps for the eye layers, making a parent eye null and linking the eyes to the null. Now we can start animating the eyes. We'll first do the left-right scan of the pupils. We'll first move in time to where we want the eyes to rest in the middle and set a position keyframe on the pupil parent null. We'll then go back to the start of the timeline and move the eyes far over to the left. We can then adjust on the other side to make sure the tree is still staring right at us. To keep our previews nice and fast, we'll move down to quarter res while we're working. Next, we want to add a bit of squish into the eye so they're not always wide. We can do this with some simple scaling keyframes. We'll select the eye parent and open the scale parameter by pressing S on the keyboard. We'll then unlink the scale so they don't remain uniform. We'll scale down vertically at the beginning to make the eyes slightly smaller and add a new keyframe using the stopwatch. We want the eyes to widen back to 100% when they start to say hello, so we'll line up at that point and set the scale back to 100. We don't want the eyes to expand slowly, so we'll drag the first keyframe up tight against the second, so there's a rapid acceleration of the eyes. Once the hello is out of the way, we don't need to look so excited, so we'll copy those keyframes over and paste them on the reverse side, bringing them back down to rest. I'm going to continue using these same keys across the rest of the dialogue and speed up the recording of the workflow. Now we can see our tree is far more expressive. I've now jumped ahead in time to add some eyebrows as well. I won't show you this workflow as it's exactly the same as the eyes and the pupils, but you can see how easy it is to keep adding more as you need it. So let's preview the final result. Hello, this is Mocha Product Manager Martin Brennan and I'm a tree! So that's how you turn yourself or any audio into a tracked face on any kind of moving object. If you have any questions, ask in the comments or pop over to the forums at borisfx.com.